Okay, I think we're right about on time, so I will get started. Welcome to this Porch Talk, which, if you don't know, is presumably going to be about sea otters and the Pacific Northwest fur trade. And how we split that, we'll see. I've gone over this talk a couple times, but only in my head. So this could take 10 minutes or it could take 2 hours. I'm not sure which, because my brain works at a different speed than my mouth. Okay. My name is Dick Eigenraam. I'm a former teacher in Oak Harbor School District. It has nothing to do with my interest in sea otters and sailing vessels and trading and all that, but I did get some experience being instructive, so hopefully that'll stand me in good stead. I haven't done any teaching stuff for about 10 years now, so get a crowd in front of me, all of a sudden I forgot what it was to be a little nervous, but I'll try to get over that. Okay, sea otters. Most people know what they are because they've been to the Seattle Aquarium or something like that and seen them. And if you haven't, you should do it because it's a nice place. And they've got some live ones there. And I used to teach, I used to take people on charter boat trips on a sailboat through the islands in this area. And I would often have guests aboard that would tell me that, oh yeah, I saw this sea otter over at Friday Harbor, or I saw this one out over on the Sound over there. And then I had to very patiently explain, no, I'm not trying to be snippy, but that was not a sea otter. And how do you know? Well, I know because there are no sea otters in the Salish Sea, in the inland waters whatsoever. If you saw something you thought was a sea otter, you were probably looking at a river otter. And river otters are more weasel-like in their appearance. They're long and slinky, but they are semi-aquatic. They love to swim and catch fish and play around in the water, and they're known for being playful. But they're not sea otters. Sea otters are only found along the Pacific shore, out in the ocean, and along the coastal waters. They don't go out in the deep waters. And typically they feed themselves on the kelp forests that you find off the ocean shores. And if you've ever, anyone not know what I'm talking about when I say a kelp forest? Yeah. By the way, this is an interactive speech, so if you have questions along the way, ask, or I'll ask you. So, okay, so kelp forest. The kelp grows very, very long, hundreds of feet sometimes, and it attaches usually to a rock on the bottom, and then there's bulbs on it that are like flotation devices, and that holds the whole kelp vertical in the water, and that provides habitat for all sorts of little critters, which provide food for sea otters and other beasts, but that's it. Urchins in particular are favorites of sea otters. They like, I don't know how they manage it without impaling their mouths, because if you've ever seen a sea urchin, they're very spiky. So, but the sea otters will pick off the sea urchins, take them to the surface, and eat them. To get past those spiky things, what they do is they usually bring up a rock with them. And they lie on their backs, and they beat the sea urchin with a rock, which opens it up, and then they can have their dinner. And they do that with clams and crabs and other things that they find in the kelp forest. And if you're a boater, you're not particularly fond of kelp forests, other than the fact that they probably tell you that the water's a little shallower here, which is a nice thing. But on the other hand, the long fronds are floating on the surface, and they tangle in your propeller and all that. So you want to avoid them from that perspective. I got all my notes on this iPad, and every time I stopped working on it, it closes itself up, and then I have to restart it. All right. Okay, the sea otter itself, they're pretty big, 60 to 90 pounds. Females are a little smaller. Males are up towards 100 pounds. So it's a small dog, or medium-sized dog, actually. And they are totally marine. This is the thing that's really special about them. People don't always appreciate. They do not have to come ashore, ever. And some of them don't. They raise their babies in the water. They give birth in the water. They feed their babies and nurse their babies in the water. They can go ashore, but they're kind of clumsy when they get on the shore. They got their back legs are designed for flopping in the water and propelling them along at a good clip. But on land, they're just sort of useless appendages. It's just kind of interesting because we tend to think of seals as being more aquatic because they don't have legs and they just have flippers, and they're obviously very good swimmers. But seals have to go onto the beach to have their young and to conceive their young. And so sea otters got one up on them on that department. I often wondered, well, what do they drink? Well, they drink seawater. They've got very good kidneys, and they pee very strong liquids. So they can do it, and it works just fine for them. And if you want to go find sea otters, you got to look somewhere between Japan, following the Pacific coast north, around Alaska, down British Columbia, down past Washington, down past Oregon, all the way down to Cabo San Lucas. And there are sea otters pretty much in all that range. Some places more heavily than others. For example, Oregon is very scant. But they're trying to reintroduce them there. So, yeah, sure.
So the food supplies you've mentioned are present in the Salish Sea.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't they come in here?
I've wondered that myself. Aren't you glad I could straighten that out for you?
Good question.
Yeah, I don't really know, because you're right. I have kelp forests here. I avoid them in my sailboat frequently, and yeah, you'd think that would be okay, but it may have to do with it's calmer here. I don't know if that makes a difference. But they're out there in the surf and on the Pacific shore. Yeah. Now, the water that they're in is cold. Very cold. Typical temperatures in the inland water here is around 50 degrees, summer or winter, really. Doesn't change that much. Same thing out on the Pacific shore. It's 40, 50 degrees, something like that. And when you go down deep, it gets much, much colder. And the sea otters will dive for their prey and get into the really cold stuff down below. And to endure that, if you were a seal, you would rely on the thick layer of blubber that you have under your fur. And that blubber is about an inch or two thick, and it's a great insulating layer. But sea otters don't have that. Sea otters just have their coat, their fur coat, and a very dense undercoat as well. In fact, it is so dense, it's the densest fur concentration of any animal in the whole world. Up to 1 million hairs per square inch, which is almost unbelievable. And one of the things sea otters do during their lifetime is they're swimming around on their back all the time. That's how they just hang out, lying on their back. They're lying there, and what they're doing is they're grooming themselves non-stop. Because if they don't groom themselves, the water will penetrate their coat, make them cold, and eventually kill them. They'll get hypothermic and die. So, and if you see a mother with a baby, the mom's grooming the kids, so that they too can be protected from the elements. So, yeah.
What does grooming entail? Like getting foreign things out of their fur?
That's part of it, but it's mostly just sort of separating the hairs one from another and sort of fluffing them up a little bit, because the more fluffy you are, the more insulation you have. And not only does that provide insulation, it also, which is sometimes a negative, provides buoyancy. That's why they can lie on their backs and just float there without any worries, because their fluffed up coat will provide them the buoyancy necessary to do that. So.
Is there any kind of oil involved? Skin?
Yeah.
Skin?
There may be some. They have glands but I'm not sure how that plays a part in the grooming. But come on. All right, okay. So, we've talked about rocks as tools. At nighttime, sometimes they'll find themselves a kelp frond and just hang on and lie there in the water, rock-a-bye baby all night. And sometimes they get hit by boats, and not a good thing. I was up in Alaska not too long ago, and they have a whole department of the Fish and Wildlife that deals with what they call roadkill, which is basically sea otters that have been run over by powerboats in Prince William Sound and surrounding areas. So modern people cause issues for them. But the biggest issue for sea otters is not accidental deaths like that. The biggest issue is the fur industry. And that's the bulk of my talk is going to be about how that all got started and where it got started and how they managed to basically wipe out all the sea otters. Around 1911, there were just a couple thousand sea otters left in the whole world. But in 1911, they passed the International Fur Seal Treaty. And since then, the populations of sea otters, and other species as well, but sea otters are making a gradual and continuous comeback. So if you go to certain areas in California, off the coast of British Columbia, Vancouver Island, who knows where Tofino is? Oh, about half of you. Tofino is on the west side of Vancouver Island, about halfway north on the island. And it's the end of the road. If you ever want to do a nice vacation trip and you haven't been there, I thoroughly recommend it. It's one of the most beautiful places in the world. And anyone else who's been there would probably agree with that. And if you don't, I won't talk to you anymore. Okay. Yeah, we'll get back to Tofino because that gets to be big in the history. All right. We put more teeth into the protection of the animals in 1972 with the Marine Mammal Protection Act, and that has made it even better. The previous protection was just for big industry, and this got it down to everybody, and it demanded that certain things be done positively, not just negatively, and saying you can't do anything to them. The only exception to their protection is the indigenous populations in Alaska and other areas. They're allowed to capture sea otters for craft, survival, for warmth, and that sort of thing. Technically, they're not supposed to sell them to anybody else, but they do. I went online. I've always wanted to have one when I give a talk like this so I could hold it up and say, this is what they look like. When I was taking that tour in Prince William Sound, watching for sea otters, the naturalist that was aboard had one, and he did exactly that. He had this big sea otter pelt. Let everybody touch it, and they're very dense, very smooth, very soft, and very valuable. And so that's kind of their downfall, because they were all those things, and they got the short end of the stick for a long time. Okay, now, who was the first to do stuff to the sea otters? Probably the Russians. Damn Russians. Yeah. And who was the first one to get there and do that? You ever hear of Vitus Bering? A couple of people. Others say, what? Okay. The Russians weren't very much in for getting in boats and going places. That just wasn't their thing. But they had a little bit of Russia facing the Atlantic, and they had a little bit more of Russia facing the Pacific. And the country was so big that back in the 1700s, they didn't know what was out there, particularly on the Pacific side. It was just emptiness as far as they were concerned. There were known little villages out there that just scraped out a really pathetic existence, because the climate was horrible, the growing conditions were horrible. And so when they wanted to expand on that, which they did, the Tsar of Russia decided that she needed to find out more about her eastern parts. And there weren't any good Russian sailors to speak of. I mean, there's some, of course, but so she went shopping around the world and found a Danish fellow by the name of Vitus Bering. And Bering worked his way up through the ranks in the Russian Navy, became a captain, and then he was offered the job of going to the east coast of Russia to do a little exploring. They knew there was a big peninsula that stuck down along that shore. It was the Kamchatka Peninsula. Some of you may have heard of that. And so he was supposed to go and check it out. He did. He took one voyage up there, explored around. But my saying that kind of minimizes what he went through. It took 3 years to hike across Russia because it's huge. And winter and summer and mosquitoes and snow up to his waist. They brought their boats with them. Yeah, sometimes they could make a mile a day. It was brutal. And when they got there, their boats were kind of crummy, actually. They weren't very good. In any event, he got back. He got lots of pats on the back and attaboys from the Tsar. And so when she wanted to know more about that part of the world, she looked them up again. And in the 1740s, she sent him out again with a bigger expedition. The idea this time was to examine the possibility that somehow Russia is connected to North America. Because nobody knew. No one. If you wanted to find the most isolated part in the whole world that had never been yet explored, it was right here where we are, from Washington State all the way up to Alaska and down into Russia. No one had been here except the native populations, who had adapted themselves quite well to the kind of strange conditions we have sometimes. But it was a totally unknown world. So Bering's job was to see what he could find about it. And he eventually managed to get across what was named the Bering Strait, in his honor, of course, and was the first European to set foot on the North American continent from that side. And it was a disastrous trip for Bering because he didn't live through it. His ship fell apart on the way. His crew mostly totally died of scurvy. Who knows what scurvy is?
Vitamin C deficiency.
There you go, vitamin C deficiency. Long sailing voyages, or even long overland voyages, if they didn't have the right diet, could lead to scurvy. Symptoms of scurvy include, one of the problems with scurvy is it attacks your body's ability to make collagen. And that means scar tissue. And other places, joints and so on, place where collagen is around. So people with scurvy, their old wounds would open up. Imagine that. You had an old wound, and all of a sudden, for no reason you could discern, all of a sudden there's your innards coming to be outwards. And yeah, so the cure for it was to get ashore, get some fresh foods, which had a content of vitamin C. Now you might wonder, as I did, how come all the native peoples, the Inuit, the Aleuts, and others that lived in Alaska in that area, how come they didn't all die of scurvy? Because they had no fresh food. They didn't eat anything but fish and seals and whales and things of that sort. And yet they were perfectly fine. Anyone know how they survived? Bet you didn't know that blubber is just full of vitamin C. Yeah, it is. Yeah. Seal eyeballs are full of vitamin C. And more than either of those two, sea algae that you can find growing in the water are also very high in vitamin C. And they would eat all that stuff, and it protected them.
They ate it raw.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, in fact, cooking kills it. Kills the vitamin C off.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and when Bering was on his trip, he was advised to eat some of this stuff, and he and his crew said, "No way, I don't eat that crap," and he didn't, and they died. Magellan had the same issue when he was sailing around the world for the first time. When he got to the Pacific, he had used up all the fresh food that he had, and he lost half his crew on the trip across the Pacific. So it was scurvy was the scourge of the nautical world, and for the longest time, no one knew what to do about it. The British got onto it probably ahead of most people.
Limes. Limes.
Yes,
Well, actually, it was lemons.
it's true.
Limes have way less vitamin C, and it would never have worked on a sea voyage, except that now they went faster. They had steamships once
Yeah.
they started on the limes. They never knew that it wouldn't have protected them.
Yeah, it was a mistranslation.
Yeah.
Yeah, they said, eat some limes, and so all the British did. And there's vitamin C in limes, of
Yeah,
course,
there
but
is. Not enough.
and they mixed it in their daily grog routine, which is a good way to get the sailors to take it. Also, Captain Cook, when he was on his voyage, had a great way to get his crew to take their vitamin C, because he didn't want them all to die and make them have to row all the way back. So he came up with a great ploy. He insisted that all his officers ate what they called sauerkraut. Basically, it was cabbage preserved, but it had vitamin C in it. Not probably as much as a lime or a lemon, but enough to prevent the onset of the disease. And so when the crew saw that the officers were privileged to get this fancy food and they were denied it, they were outraged and eventually came to the captain to demand that they get some too. And so Cook was using a little reverse psychology there, and it worked, paid off. He didn't lose anybody to scurvy on his multiple year voyages. And so that was a good thing. Let's see here. How we doing? Okay.
Rose hips tea. What is
There you go.
that?
That's true. They didn't have any rose hips. Probably they preserved pretty well, though, I imagine. Yeah, come on. One good thing came of Bering's trip. One, he got to claim all that area for the Russians. That's a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how you look at it. The Russians got to claim all that. Not only that, the other thing is he brought along a naturalist, a fellow by the name of Steller.
Still a sea lion.
Yeah. Some of you may have heard the name because they're in the waters around here and more further north. There's a very large sea lion called the Steller sea lion, named for the biologist that Bering had aboard. There was also another animal called the Steller sea cow, which is kind of a strange beast because it's very much like a dugong or a manatee, which are tropical beasts. You find them in Florida, you find them in Indonesia, but these are up in the Arctic, and so they're now extinct. They were too easy to catch for whalers and native populations, and so they just basically ate them all, and that was it. But in addition to that, Steller got his name on the Steller jay, which is still around. He also got his name on, let's see, well, that would be about it. But the sad thing is, he had spent 10 years preparing for this voyage. He got on the ship, it fell apart, he got ashore. Bering was in a hurry to get back because his ship was falling apart. He says, okay, you can have 10 hours. So poor Steller had to do all this work in 10 hours to get back on the ship. And then they all got shipwrecked and survived on land for a while and then rebuilt their ship from pieces and sailed back to Russia, those that are still alive, which was about half the crew.
Where did they shipwreck?
In the Aleutians. Okay. Now, oh yeah, one more thing. Because they had established that there were lands and islands and whatnot out in that area, it kind of lit a fire under Russian fur trading. And so Russians would start moving out, and they would get various boats, usually relatively small for the nastiness of the waters in that area, and they would set up little, what they call factories, which was basically a place where they would collect sea otters and treat them and bundle them up and send them back to Russia for sale. But the sale often went to China, but in any event, the problem was that the way the Russians caught sea otters, and this is pretty horrible. They would capture a couple hundred of the native population and their families, hold their women and kids hostage, and the men would have to go catch sea otters. And they were not pleasant folks when it came to their mercantile interests, and so. But that's how they did it, and that was their primary method of acquiring sea otters, was beating up on the indigenous populations. And so, yeah.
They enslaved the Aleuts and forced them to build extra long kayaks.
Yeah.
Baydarkas, which is the Russian.
Right, Russian name, yeah.
So there were 3 cockpits, and they'd have 2 Aleuts paddling and one Russian with a
They
gun.
make sure they did it right, yeah.
Yeah, and came all the way down to California with looking for spurs.
Yeah, speaking of which, eventually, getting into right around the turn of 1800, they got down as far as Fort Ross, which they established. It's in Northern California. The Russian River is down there, named after their presence. And this was all the results of a trading company that was established to take advantage of all the trade in Russia, called the Russian-American Fur Company.
Is this before or after?
Yes. Yes, it is. Yeah.
So what was the commercial use of the sea otter pelts?
There was none, really.
They were going after it for some reason, right? Someone was paying them?
They were pretty.
Fur coats.
No, fur coats.
So they didn't, they made coats, yeah.
Yeah, they could. And smaller things. But there's an issue we're going to come to that's going to go into that in more detail. But the Chinese were big on furs. And so that was the main market for these furs. And they could get the furs for next to nothing in Alaska or wherever. And they could sell them in China for huge profits. And we'll talk more about that when we get to the British here. So, but before we get to the British, we'll go to the Spanish. Okay. Way back around, I don't remember the exact year, but right around the turn of the century, 1500, Balboa crossed the Isthmus of Panama. Basically, he sailed his ship up to the shore of Panama, got out, and hoofed it across to the Pacific. And when he got there, he looked north and he looked south, and all he saw was water. He said, "That's a big ocean." And he said, "I'm going to claim that ocean and all the land it touches for Spain," which is kind of a big statement. But that's what he did. And Spain, not one to shrink from responsibility, they said, "Great, now we own all that." And they took advantage of it. I mean, you think, how could that possibly be? But the Spanish moved their ships to the west side of South America. They established a routine trade across the Pacific to the Philippines. And then they would come back via our northwest coast, Oregon and Washington, and then sail down to Mexico and Acapulco and empty the trade goods that they had obtained there. And it was a very lucrative trade. They made a lot of money. It was treasure, too, gold. And yeah, who saw the movie The Goonies? A couple. If you get it, if you get a chance, go see it. It's kind of fun. But it talks about some kids that find the wreck of an old Spanish galleon in a cave, and all the gold and such is still there, and it goes on. But it's not made up. There was a treasure galleon that crashed on the Oregon coast, and right about where they said it was in the film. So it's kind of a real thing. However, the main treasure was not gold. And I'm not quite sure why it was that valuable, but it was beeswax. It was beeswax. And for many, many years, big chunks of beeswax would wash up on the Oregon beaches. People wondered where it came from. Well, it came out of this wreck back in the 1700s. So, okay, so the Spanish had established themselves on the west coast of South America and up into Mexico, which, as you know, obviously Mexico is a Spanish settlement. And back home in Spain, the powers that be there were getting a little bit nervous about the Russian presence infringing on their water. Because remember, Balboa's claim went all the way up to Alaska and all the way down to Antarctica. And they wanted it all. And so the Spanish didn't know much at all about the northern coast of North America. Nothing at all. So they sent out, they equipped a base down in Mexico called San Blas. Today, it's just a tiny little village and not worth much. I'm told the mosquitoes are really horrendous there. The sailors that were there apparently mentioned it too, because they talked about seasonal fevers that they would get there. So it was a tough space to be. But they did have trees and such, and they could use those for shipbuilding. And so they built ships, and then they sailed up the west coast of what is now the United States and came all the way up to Vancouver Island. And the main place they stopped was, if you know Tofino, was north of Tofino. It's a little harbor, an inlet called Nootka. And it's an interesting place because it's the end of nowhere, even today. You can't drive there. There's no roads there. You'd have to go on a boat or airplane and float plane come in, but yeah.
Didn't that used to be the biggest settlement north of San Francisco at one point, Nootka?
It may be true, because,
There last summer.
yeah, because eventually it became the hub of the fur trade in the Northwest. But it was started with the Spanish going up here. So they went to Nootka, and then they went beyond. He got as far north as around 5440 degrees latitude, which is quite a bit further north than that. They all were getting scurvy, so they turned around and went back because they didn't know the things the British knew at that time. And yeah, let's see, I lost my train of thought there. I'll look it up, it's in here. I took my good notes, and my machine keeps closing. There we go. There we go. Yeah, that's right. The guy that did that was named Perez, and he got as far north as 5440, and he apparently also stopped at Nootka. Anyone have any idea what 5440's significance could be?
5440 or fight.
Yeah, if you had a good history teacher, your good history teacher told you about 5440 or fight. That comes from when the United States was arguing with Britain as to where our northern border would be. And we had inherited the Spanish claims to the entire west coast. This treaty, the Ovis Treaty. And we got it. And so that, as far as we were concerned, the Americans, is that was our land. And the Canadians, of course, had other ideas about the whole thing because they had Cook, they had Vancouver, and many, many other explorers been up in the area and done stuff. So the treaty was settled eventually by going to the 49th parallel, as you all know. And so it was kind of a compromise. They got the north part, we got the south part. If you've been to San Juan Islands, you know that it wasn't quite settled because the San Juan Islands ended up being indeterminate. The British said the border put the San Juan Islands in British territory. The Americans said the border put the San Juan Islands in the U.S. territory. And so they fortified the island, one on each end, shot around a little bit, never hit anybody, but they did kill a pig, so it was known as the Pig War. And eventually, instead of going to war and fighting another American Revolution, they compromised and had the Kaiser of Germany sort the whole thing out. Why the Kaiser of Germany? Why not, you know? And he looked at the maps and drew a line on it, which put the San Juan Islands in our side of the line, and so the San Juans are now U.S. territory. Gulf Islands are a part of Canadian territory. And so that was that.
Didn't that take a really long time to settle?
Not too bad. It was in the 1850s, which is interesting because that's right around the time this town of Coupeville was founded. And but they did build a fort Americans built a fort on the southern end. The British had a much more civilized looking place, northern end, tucked in the trees, and very nice place to be.
They're still there.
I always end up taking bird walks. There's the battery that was built on the south end by the Americans was designed by American military engineer by the name of Roberts, and he had served in the Civil War. No, later he served in the Civil War, I should say. But Roberts. But his main claim to fame, and most of you know this. You ever hear of Robert's Rules of Order? He was a military engineer, and he wrote Robert's Rules of Order while he was here. So that's just a weird bit of trivia. It has absolutely nothing to do with the fur trade, but it's true. Okay, I better get on, or I'll never get to the end of this. Okay. Oh yeah. For the literate people among you, San Blas was the subject of a poem by Longfellow. Anyone ever heard of the poem? The Bells of San Blas. Oh well, I was going to read it to you, but it was too long. But in any event, it was basically what Longfellow was doing was he was looking at the wreckage of what was formerly at San Blas and sort of mourning the ascendancy of the Spanish population, that all their empire had crumbled to this pile of dust, basically, that was left, and a few bells lying in that dust. So that was his poem. When the Spanish got to a place, the thing they normally did was they pounded a big cross in the ground and they claimed the land for Spain. And that's what almost all the Spanish explorers did. And the native populations would look at them like they were a little weird. But sometimes they would actually come and help. And sometimes they would, after the Spanish left, they would take the cross down and use it for firewood or something. But the Spanish, their motives for exploration were very different from the British or the Russians or the Americans for that matter. The Spanish were there for the ascendancy of Spain and for religion. They wanted to convert the native populations, and they would do that by capturing them, enslaving them, sending them to California to where they could work and be saved. And that's how it went. It was yeah. I don't think it was very nice, but that was just me. Okay. Okay, now we get to the English. And these are all going to kind of overlap as we go. How are we doing? How we're going to get there. You got to know who Captain Cook is to get through this part, because he is the main man for the British. Anyone know how many voyages Cook made?
3?
Hmm?
You said 3?
You get a prize. I don't have it, but I'll bring it next time. Yeah. Yeah, he made 3 voyages here. First time he went to Polynesia because he wanted to watch the planet Venus cross across the face of the sun, and he had astronomers aboard who built an observatory there so they could observe this and check out some of the theories they had as to how the solar system and everything was arranged and make sure that their calculations were all correct. And they did that, which was a good thing because it could have been cloudy that day. And it was a long trip for nothing, you know. But in any event, so that was the first voyage. Second voyage, they were looking for what was called terra incognita. And for them at that time, they were looking for Australia, which was not well known. And so that was not as successful a voyage. Third and last voyage, he was under somewhat secret orders to come up here. He did go through Australia area, Barrier Reef, up in that area, across the Pacific, landed on the southern Oregon coast, and then sailed up our coastline. And he was interested in all things that might lead off to the right, because he was looking for a Northwest Passage, which is a way to go by boat from the Atlantic to the Pacific in the northern waters. And they didn't know exactly the full extent of North America, though he took some accurate measurements for both latitude and longitude while he was in the area. So they were hoping there might be a long inlet that connected with, say, Hudson's Bay or something like that. And so any big inlet that headed off to the east was of interest. So he was merrily sailing up the coast, and when he got up to Washington coast, he was having a heck of a time because the wind was out of the west, as it often is on our coast. And one of the things about old-time sailing ships is they could not sail into the wind, not very well at any rate. And so, and particularly if it was stormy, which it was. And so Cook is trying very desperately to not get pushed by that westerly wind onto the rocky Oregon and Washington coasts. And finally they got up to right where Cape Flattery is. Does everyone know where Cape Flattery is? It's the upper left-hand corner of the state of Washington. Sticks out right there at the very end. It was named by Cook. He named it that because he said it flattered, it was an old-fashioned usage of the word flatter, but it flattered him with the idea that there might be safe harbors behind it. Problem was, he was getting beaten to death by those winds. The coast is particularly rugged right around Cape Flattery. So instead of seeing the Strait of Juan de Fuca, which was right on the other side of it, he headed out to the Pacific and went further offshore where he'd be safer and wouldn't get crunched on the rocks. And so he never found or saw the Straits of Juan de Fuca, which is one of the main reasons he was there. So, because it was believed that those straits might continue on to who knows where, and might be a very valuable find, but he didn't find it. He went up to Nootka and saw the Indians there, talked to them a bit, and this is an interesting thing. They had, I think, 3 silver spoons, the Indians did, which was kind of mystifying to Cook. He said, where the heck you get silver spoons up here? And they weren't forthcoming at all about where they came from. Yes?
So the natives of that area were very friendly to the
Yes.
explorers coming.
Absolutely.
by. Nootka was named Friendly Cove because of
Yes.
the friendliness.
Yes.
Yeah.
Also, the name Nootka is interesting too because it's a native word. And I've heard a number of versions of this, but one I hear the most is that when the ship came offshore to that Nootka Sound area, that their anchorage was around the corner of the point, and the harbor was inside that. So basically it says Nootka was the Indians saying, come around. They thought they were naming the place. So it was a mistake.
Want to see a picture of it?
Oh yeah, I have, but I'll take another look. They did eventually build a fort there. Ooh,
So now
my
it's
legs
a
went to sleep.
Coast Guard station.
Yeah.
And there is one caretaker Native
Yeah.
American there, and a wood carver.
Yeah,
Picture of that too.
yeah. The main place where the natives of that area, they go deep into that inlet and all the way across, almost to the other side of the island, a village called Tahis. Yeah.
Another interesting thing you mentioned about the storms and the west wind.
Yes.
A lot of ships would wreck and the people would make it to shore. I'm talking about the west coast of Vancouver Island now.
Yeah,
And they would still perish because it was so rugged.
yeah,
With all the rainfall and the valleys come through, they just couldn't get out.
yeah,
So
it's,
they put in a
Life-
trail system called the
Oh,
West Coast Trail,
mhm.
or the Lifesaver Trail.
Yeah.
You can hike it today.
Yes.
I've done it
Yes.
twice. And those little valleys have like a steel cable going across, and you get in 2 or 3 people in your backpacks and pull yourself across.
I'm told they have a very active life-saving service still, too.
Yeah, and so when they got into GPS and stuff, it became much less important because a lot less shipwrecks. So now it's a national park, and
Yeah, the whole coast is part of that park, pretty much, yeah.
it's so popular that people all over the world come there.
Okay,
Challenge too, probably.
Is it
Yeah,
Pac-
it's
Pacific Rim? Is it?
Pacific Rim National
Yeah,
Park,
I've
right?
been there.
Yeah. And there is one estuary that cuts the trail in half.
Yes.
And so you have to, there's a Native American there that you pay.
ferry you across, yes.
And we were doing it down and back, so we bargained a 2-way rate. But it was pretty neat, and now I understand that they sell $10 hamburgers.
Why not? They're imported.
That's right.
Yeah, well, in any event, Cook got there, found those spoons, and a bit of a mystery as to how they got there. They became important later on because when they were trying to sort out who owned this particular bit of land, the Spanish claim was based on Perez. Remember, he went up to 5440 and stopped at Nootka. It was presumed that he was the one that had left those spoons with the native population there, which gave truth or at least some evidence to support the Spanish claim. So the spoons were an item of importance for figuring out international relations. Okay, now, I spoke way too slowly. Okay, I'll have to talk faster. I got to tell you now about my favorite guy. And no one ever knows who he is. And he's worth knowing about. Maybe someone has. I'll be very surprised if you have more than 1 or 2, if that many. How many people know who John Ledyard is? Ledyard. 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 Oh goodness, they're all mystified. Would you be surprised that they write books about him?
No.
Okay.
Lots of people I don't know.
Yeah, that's true, yeah. Okay, let me explain. John Ledyard was an American and raised in New England. He was a student at Dartmouth College, not a particularly good one, but he was a student. He got tired of it after a while, didn't want to do that anymore. So he went out into the woods, cut down a big tree. By the way, Dartmouth at that time was in the northern end of New Hampshire, and there weren't many roads or anything up there. It was wilderness pretty much, and it was a very good college. It also specialized in serving Native American populations, and so Ledyard he got tired of it whole thing, cut down a tree, hollowed it out, threw it into the Connecticut River, and paddled all the way down to Long Island Sound. Made his getaway. That's cutting class, isn't it? Yes. And he was moderately well-to-do. He had family in Long Island and in Connecticut, and so we went and visited them for a bit. And then he was at loose ends as to what he was going to do. He liked his experience going down the Connecticut. By the way, the students at Dartmouth do an annual canoe ride down the Connecticut to commemorate his voyage. But in any event, he didn't know what to do. We're getting close to, it's around 1775, I think, something like that. And the British are in the colonies, and they have an army there, of course. And they have Marines. And Ledyard said, that's cool, I could do that. So he signed up with the Royal Marines, and he was shipped off to Britain and got his training and one of the main jobs of Marines in those days was to serve aboard a ship. And then when they had to go ashore and kill people, they were available. So, so Ledyard became a Marine. And when Cook got ready to take his third voyage, his ship would have a complement of Marines. Ledyard was one of them. Interesting. Cook's third voyage started on July the 12th. Not the 4th, but the 12th. But the key thing here is that it takes a while for the news to get across the Atlantic, and so the king and all the other powers that be in Britain didn't know that they were at war with the colonies, and nor did Ledyard when he signed up with them. So he sailed off with Cook, unaware that Cook was at war with his people, and so he sailed with them all the way, came all the way around up to Nootka eventually. I'm doing an abbreviated version because I'm running out of time. And he, while there, like many of the people on the crew, they traded with this and that with the native people there. And the native people were very short of anything made of metal. So if you had some metal knickknacks, a pocket knife, a coin, the ships were, unfortunately, or fortunately, coated on their bottoms with sheet copper. And the natives liked that, and they would sometimes surreptitiously peel it off when no one was looking. Not a good thing, because then the shipworms would get in there and eat the whole damn thing. So, but in any event, they would trade their little bits of metal, and the Indians would trade them sea otter pelts. And Cook was okay with that because, hey, we got to go up to Alaska next, and it's cold up there. So, yeah, get yourself some furs. Why not? So a lot of the crew members traded for a few furs. Rumor has it, I don't know the British currency at that time that well, but a couple of pence for a fur, or the equivalent thereof. And so, continued on to Alaska, maybe wearing their sea otter pelts, who knows. They got winter, they sailed through the Bering Strait into the Arctic Ocean, but the ice stopped them, turned around and went back. And being sensible people, they didn't want to be in the cold Arctic waters during the winter. So where would you go? Well, Hawaii, of course. So they went down to what was known at that time as the Sandwich Islands and wintered there. They had good relations at first with the natives there. But that's because the natives had a legend that the great Redeemer was going to come to join them somewhere around the time in similar circumstances that Cook arrived in. And so they all thought he was a god. And that was good for a while, and they traded and had fun, and it was treated well. They treated him like a god, and it was good. Eventually they left, but circumstances at sea caused them to turn around and come back. And the Hawaiians, what are you doing here? You're a god. You're not supposed to come back. And they stole some stuff from the ship. Cook got mad. He tried to get it back. They got mad. And Cook got killed. They killed him on the beach, beat him to death with clubs and dismembered him, and that was that. So, without Cook, his next in line took over. They continued from where they left off up in Alaska, sailed down Kamchatka and down to China. And when they got to China, they were in Macau, which is a Portuguese port, actually, and it's still today it is. It's kind of weird. It's kind of like Hong Kong. It's an enclave in China. And in any event, one thing they found out is that when the Chinese looked at all the things that they had that they might want to trade, the thing that interested them the very most was the sea otter pelts that they had traded for next to nothing. In fact, they could get around $100 US dollars for a pelt. Now, you might say, well, that's nice, but it's nothing grand. except in those days, $100 were worth equivalent of about $4,000. So if you had 10 pelts, for a common seaman who doesn't make probably more than $50 for the whole voyage, that was quite the deal. And so the crew is really excited. One, to make money that they could spend in Macau, but two, to think, how much more could I get if I went back? In fact, they almost had a mutiny. They were trying to talk the captain into turning around and going back to the northwest coast, Nootka and whatever, and get some more furs and come back to Macau and sell them and get rich. They, the powers, the captains of the ships, no, they weren't going to do that. A couple of the guys, though, stole one of the lifeboats and set off rowing to here. They were not heard of again, but that's that's kind of brutal. That's in any event. So they get back to the UK eventually, and Ledyard finds out they're at war. He goes back to the U.S. Once there, he deserts. Why not? Yeah. And before he left Britain, though, they confiscated everybody who kept a journal for the voyage. Everyone's journal was confiscated because they wanted to have the official accounting of the voyage come out first. And so they went to everybody, said, what you got, and gathered a pile of books and papers and whatnot, and took it all up. Ledyard was clever, he hid his. And so when he got back to the U.S., he published it there almost right away. It proved to be very popular. In fact, it's called Captain Cook's Last Voyage. This is it. This is actually it's a photocopy, so it's got the old-fashioned typography, the funny-looking S's and all that. But this is his entire account of that voyage and everything he encountered. And so the book that Ledyard wrote actually got back to England before the official account was let out of the British publications. And Ledyard wanted to, in the United States, to get up a mission to go all the way around and sell furs, because he's all into that. And back in England, his book was selling, and then eventually the official account came out, and that all told the tale of how you could make a fortune. So a whole bunch of different companies got into sailing off to the Pacific Northwest, a place that was just a big hole in the map before all this. I'm sure eventually they would have explored this place, looked around, and discovered what was here. But this fur trade accelerated the process thousands of %. It was just a remarkable thing. So lots of ships. Right of interest here, 2 New England ships, the Columbia and the Lady Washington, came here directly as a result of Ledyard's book. Have you even seen the Lady Washington?
Have you seen it lately?
No.
It's
They-
really
Is it not kept up? Oh, that's sad.
No mast, no nothing, it's out in dry dock, it's a mess.
Are they working on fixing it?
They're hoping to raise the money.
Terrible. Okay, in any event, so lots of people coming here, and this obviously didn't make the Spanish very happy because they owned all this land according to them, and is anyone going to get mad at me if I go about 10 minutes over? Okay, I'll just, if you need to go, don't worry about it. That's all right, because we're just about eating up the official time. The Spanish were getting testy about the whole thing, and so eventually they got a couple of ships, the British ships, and captured them. They basically came aboard with guns and said, we got you. And there wasn't anything you could do with it, because these weren't just they were merchant ships. They weren't well armed, and they shipped sailed those ships down to San Blas, down in Mexico. So I think 2 of them, and with their crews. And word of that finally got back to England. And as you can might imagine, the British thought that wasn't such a nice thing for their merchants to be taken prisoner and escorted 2,000 miles plus to another place and deprived of their ships and so on. So the British had harsh words to say to the Spanish, and the Spanish said, heck with you. And both sides started building ships, warships. It's called the Spanish armament. And the whole idea was that they were going to have a war. They were going to fight a major war over who's going to be in charge up here. And it almost came to blows, but diplomatics got together and decided what they would avoid that. And so they said, okay, we'll sign a treaty, and the treaty will give England some of what they want, and Spain will get some of what they want, and we'll send this guy that we know. The British would send Captain George Vancouver up to this part of the world from England, and his job would be to meet with the Spanish representative here, which is a fellow by the name of Quadra, and he was ensconced up at Nootka. And so they would get together there, and then they would sign the official papers saying that this was a done deal. And I'm making a long story very short here, but when they got there, Quadra and Vancouver put their heads together and looked at what their bosses had said as far as what the agreement was supposed to be, and it wasn't really close. The Spanish version and the English version were quite different. The English, well, of course they did want their ships back, which they got, but they also thought that the Spanish were going to leave and move back down to California, where most of their settlements were at that time. And the Spanish, on the other hand, thought that you've been at Nootka, just around the corner from Friendly Cove. There's a little beach over there, and that's where the British had set up their factory for processing furs and so forth. It was about 100 yards worth of beach, and the Spanish thought they were going to give the British that little bit of beach, and the British thought they were going to get the whole country up there. So the 2 guys, they got along well. They drank to each other's health. They had a good time and talked and chatted, but they knew it was all beyond their pay grade. So they said, well, we'll just have to let the other people work on it, and that'll be it. So, and eventually the Spanish withdrew because they were overextended. They're all over South America, all over Mexico, all over the Philippines. I mean, Spain's not that big a country. And so they were overextended, and so they were more than happy to divest of some because they were spending more on these places than they were making. This was at the time when the United States got Florida. The treaty that gave us Florida also gave us the northwest coast of America, because it also defined the western edge of the Louisiana Purchase. And I can just squeeze in the last anecdote, and then we'll call it quits. What did Ledyard do next? Oh, okay. He selling his book was good, but he was an adventuresome soul. He wanted to do stuff, and so he got back on a ship and went back to England, and then on to France. And at that time, this is now after the Revolution, Jefferson was stationed in France as an ambassador. And so Ledyard went to have a nice chat with him, and they got along famously. Jefferson was very interested in all the things Ledyard had to say, because he was interested in the extent of the American continent and how he was already thinking in terms roughly of Lewis and Clark. And Ledyard had a proposal for him. He said, how about I walk from here across Russia, get a boat there, sail down to Nootka, and from there, walk back to Boston. Yeah, why not? Yeah.
You never heard from him again.
No, actually, here's what happened. Jefferson hardly endorsed him. The reason that Ledyard really wanted to talk to Jefferson was because he wanted him to smooth the way with the Tsar of Russia. Because otherwise you get arrested and thrown in the clink, and that would be it. So Jefferson did what he could, but the Tsar said, no, can't do it. So Ledyard said, what the hell, I'll do it anyhow. And he did. He set off across Russia. He got about a little more than 3/4 of the way across. Eventually the Tsar got wind of it. They had a relay of mail riders that would connect. And they took him into custody and took him back. Poor guy, all that distance, and he had to go back. And so he got to talking to Jefferson some more, and they said, well, I know what else you can try. Why don't you, we need to know more about Africa. He says, so why don't you go to Africa and go check out where the Nile comes from. So he did. He went to Africa, and unfortunately, while there, caught a fever and died. Sorry. So that's John Ledyard. He's an interesting character, and he should be more famous than he is, I think. But
Had to be a real optimist to be an explorer.
yeah, oh yeah, because the death rate was fairly high. Yes. Okay, I could probably talk another hour, but I won't. And I do appreciate all your attention, and I hope you picked up a few things.